obviously starting with storyboards, but then very, very quickly moving into just grabbing iPhones and dancing. Half the time we're in a car park, other times we're in a hotel room, like wherever you can grab it with whatever dancers you're around, and just trying it, shooting it out and cutting it together, and then reviewing it and going, that's still a bit clunky. That 3 seconds works beautifully, so let's keep that. And just building upon that. So we probably shot out in rehearsal that number maybe like 80 times.
It's a monumental creative achievement. I know it took you 6 years to make this film, and I would just like to say it was worth every tough day.
Thanks so much. That means a lot coming from you. As you know, I'm a massive admirer of your work, and I do that thing. Actually, it was really funny. Like Jason Reitman the other day explained filmmakers as the opposite of being a magician. I don't know whether he said it or someone was telling him this story, but he explained that, you know, as a magician, you can get away with doing a trick to about 95% of the people, and they are just like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then 5% who are magicians look at you and go, yeah, that's cute. And he said it's the inverse with filmmakers, in that, you know, you show quite often your work to an audience and they're like, yeah, it's cute. And filmmakers are like, oh my God, that was amazing. I really do. I feel that when I look at what you create, and so when you talk about this in the same way, it's.
Well, let me just ask you a few questions about it, because it's this. So this film was independently financed.
Yeah. I don't advise doing films of this scale independently. just that's just a word of advice.
And I guess just to get it out of the way, because when I heard you talk about it, I found it to be fascinating. Why the chimpanzee?
Yeah, it really came. I just wanted to come at it at a different way creatively. I really, you know, there's been a string of musical biopics, and I just thought there was a more interesting avenue to take, and so I went back to the recordings, because this is kind of based off a year and a half of just sitting like this with Rob in his recording studio. Just every time I came to LA, I would just sit with him and we would just chat. And initially those recordings were never meant for a film. They were just meant for him to listen to in a nursing home one day. and then after a while I was like, actually the bones of this story could be really great. But I would have to solve a way in, because Rob's not visually iconic. Elvis with his quiff is visually iconic. Elton John with his round sunglasses or wild sunglasses, broad rim hat, and a feather boa from 20 meters away, you're like, that's Elton John. Robbie doesn't have that. And so I went back to the recordings to try and find a way into it, because I knew I wanted to use his voiceover to tell the story. And I just found time and time again him referring to himself as a performing monkey. And he would just say it really off the cuff. He'd say, it didn't really matter, I was just up the back dancing around like a performing monkey, or, you know, I didn't really know what was going on, but they just dragged me up on stage to be a performing monkey. And then when you get into his story and you start going, he's always performing, like as we are all. But, you know, like in Stoke-on-Trent, he wasn't as tough as the other kids, so he used to pretend that he was tougher. And there's this beautiful story which I couldn't fit in the film. I tried to jam it in so many drafts, because it was really beautiful, and it says so much about his relationship with his nan. Well, dramatic. But his nan had an account at their local newsagent, you know, and she didn't have a lot of money, and it was just, the account was there just to pay for her morning paper. And Rob used to pretend with the other kids that he would go into the store and shoplift. So he'd say to them, "What do you want? I'll get you whatever you want. I'm going to steal it." And they'd all order, chocolate bars and whatever, magazines, comics. And then he'd go in and he'd just put it all on the account and say, it's on my nan's account. And he'd buy it. And then he'd put it under his jacket and he would come out as if he'd shoplifted it and then share it with the other kids. And that just sums Rob up completely. And his nan never brought it up to him. And that's the sweetest thing. She knew 100% who was putting stuff on her account. And she never mentioned it to his parents. She never mentioned it to him. And it gave him street cred. And so it's sort of that thing where he was always putting on a performance, whether it was to his dad, who he just wanted to look at him the same way he looked at Sinatra on the TV, whether it was to the other kids in Stoke-on-Trent. I just, as soon as I kind of came up with this conceit of him being this little performing monkey, it just made sense. It didn't make sense to anyone financing the film, but it made sense to me at the time.
There are several just knockout musical sequences in this film. I think the most emotional for me is when Robbie's driving away from the band after being kicked out. It's sort of such a pure distillation of addiction and being lost and kind of the desire for self-destruction. It really knocked my socks off. But in terms of just sheer directorial muscle, we got to talk about the Regent Street number, because the story behind that is incredible.
Yeah. So
how did you pull it off?
So Regent Street, I always used to walk down Regent Street and in the middle of London and think, it's this big wide street, it's got this beautiful curve to it. Why has no one done a musical number down this street? I'm sure you've thought it too if you've ever been there. And I then spent a year and a half realizing why no one's done a musical number down there, because to get the Westminster Council and the Crown Estate, because it's Crown land, on board to shut down a bus route for 4 nights in a row is near impossible. And it was so difficult, and it took so many people and so many meetings. And obviously we can't rehearse on the street, so we have to tape out Regent Street 1-for-1 scale in a huge studio space outside of London. Every rubbish bin, every bus stop, every curb, every doorway we're running in and out of, and rehearse. And we did that the week before with the entire crew, with 500 dancers, with taxis, the double-decker bus that we were using. Everyone had to go into this space, and we had to kind of run it like we were each night. So we knew that we had 4 nights, and so during that week, each day we would prep as if it was a night of shooting. Right. And we would do it to the clock, and we literally were saying, can we pull this off in the time we have on the street? And we did that every single day, just rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed it. Because the other thing is, because it's all one shot, if any one night we don't make the night, that's it. It's not that we don't have that section, we don't have the entire number. So it was such a high pressure shoot, and everyone was very focused, and we had this incredible week where we got it down, we'd rehearsed it with everyone within an inch of its life, and we were ready to go. And then the Queen died. And I know you laughed, but it's not funny. And I can laugh now, but it wasn't funny at the time. In fact, I remember distinctly being in the fetal position in the shower, weeping that night. No one was more sad about the passing of the Queen than me. But yeah, they had 10 days of mourning, so we got the call from the Crown Estate saying, you're not filming. So we then lost all our money because there's no insurance on the death of the Queen. And producers in the room will say, well, it's force majeure, you could probably argue that. And then I'd say, yes, but it's actually civil authority that shuts you down. And after COVID, civil authority capped their payouts because there were so many payouts over COVID because of civil authority shutdowns. They capped it at 250 grand. And that wasn't even worth applying for because of the amount of money we lost. So it was an enormous amount of money. We then had to raise that money again. There was lots of conversations. It took another 5 months because we had to wait for the funeral, the coronation of the king, and then we finally were allowed back on to Regent Street 5 months later. So for 5 months, obviously the conversation went on, well, do you really need this musical number? You know, and I was like, yes. And they were like, really? And I was like, yes. And they're like, but you don't really need it. And I was like, yeah, I really need it. Unfortunately, it was 5 months of having that conversation over and over again. But eventually we got the new money in, we reshot it, and every time I watch it, I think that came so close to not happening. Yeah.
It's just out of curiosity, what is your background in terms of music, dance? How the hell are you so talented?
No, I'm not. I do these things every day, right? So I sketch, I dance, I sing, and I do them to a degree that is really, you would think over time I would get better, and I just don't. But I only need to get an idea out into the world so that much more talented people can execute it. And that's kind of the thing. I'm, you know, my background's in animation, so what you find is animators have a love of motion. And if you look back to the famous people who started Disney, quite a lot of them married dancers, because the study of motion, if you're looking at people who've perfected the art of motion, it's dancers. And the same magic that is in great animation is in a great dance performance. Which is why if you see 10 people all in a row, all wearing top hats and tails, all doing the same choreography, why is it that we all look at the person who's second from the left? If they're all doing the same thing and they're all wearing the same outfits. And the magic's in the in-betweens. The magic is not the pose from here to here. The magic is the person who is rolling their wrist in between those two and creating that snap, which is what your eye is drawn to. It's the same in animation. So there's actually this amazing footage, I think it's on YouTube, of the animator who's filming a girl who's from the American Ballet who's doing the motion for Snow White. And she's got her basket and she's skipping and she's reaching down and she's picking up. And every now and then she just looks into camera and smiles. And then she goes back to doing whatever the next thing they need Snow White to do. And over the course of this reference footage, you see her keep shooting a look into camera and smiling. And what you're actually watching is two people falling in love. Because the animator behind the camera, that's the first time he saw his future wife.
Wow. I think what I find to be so fascinating about this movie is it's a musical, but the numbers are so embedded into the narrative of the piece that it doesn't feel as if there's a number and then you're waiting and there's another number. It's motivated from it comes out of the sort of emotions of the characters and their wants, their desires, and it has this seamless sort of flow to it. So I have two questions, I guess. One, which is, how do you begin to storyboard? Do you storyboard some of these sequences? Because there's such a looseness to your work at times that it's I'm curious what the process is behind that. For instance, the dance on the deck of the boat, right? They meet, and suddenly you're flashing forward through their entire relationship, and there's a beautiful sort of romanticism to it, but the messiness of their relationship at the same time. What's that process like?
So it's a lot of sketching. So, and when I say sketching, you obviously starting with storyboards, but then very, very quickly moving into just grabbing iPhones and dancing and just trying it, shooting it out and cutting it together and then reviewing it and going, that's still a bit clunky. That 3 seconds works beautifully, so let's keep that. And just building upon that. So we probably shot out in rehearsal that number maybe like 80 times.
Wow.
That's how many. Like, and when I say shot it out in rehearsal, it sounds like we're in a rehearsal space. Half the time we're in a car park. Other times we're in a hotel room. Like wherever you can grab it with whatever dancers you're around. You know, a lot of the core creative crew that worked on this film and also worked on Showman with me, we do commercials in between, and so we're often in weird places on the planet where we just end up in hotel ballrooms just working on whatever musical number we're trying to solve. So we shoot it out, we cut it together, and then once we've got a sort of video version that's working, particularly if it's space related or location related, like Regent Street, we then take it in and do 3D previs. And the 3D previs just allows us to do a 1-to-1 scale of what is Regent Street, what does it look like when you put 300 people down Regent Street, what happens when you put 400, and what we worked out, the sweet spot was 500 people, because from where our camera was and the lens that we were going to be on, the last of the people would just stop as it went around the corner, so it looked like the people went on forever. So things like that, you can't really guess that, you know, and so that gets kind of technical, but it's after you've sort of sketched it out. And the same on Regent Street. We used to just go to Regent Street at 2 a.m. and dance down Regent Street with a handful of dancers, not the guys themselves, just friends of ours who were dancers, and we would just dance down Regent Street with drunk people screaming at us, "Is that for TikTok?" And I'd say, "No." And they'd say, "What's your handle?" And I'd go, "It's not for TikTok." So the number of drunk people on Regent Street between 2 and 3 a.m. is extraordinary. It's just amazing. So it really is very iterative, you know.
What can you walk us through what your casting process is like? Because the performances in this, from Robbie to Nicole, just the entire family, they're just exceptional performances.
Yeah, so it's a real mix of some very established actors. You know, Steve Pemberton, who plays his dad, is sort of British royalty, as is Alison Steadman, who's done a whole bunch of Mike Leigh films. And, you know, like there's some very established British actors and even Australian actors like, you know, Kate Mulvaney, who plays the mum, who is on screen for such a short time, and you feel so much for her in so few words. And she's, again, in Australia, she's an extraordinary actor and has been on stage and won every award you can hope to win. But and then there's some newcomers, like John O'Davies, who plays Robbie, is just a beast, and that is a name you're going to be hearing so much more of, because he is just extraordinary, and his performance and his study of Robbie and the nuances of what makes Robbie Robbie. And even Robbie was watching himself going, "This is ridiculous. Like, this guy is just doing me." And he really, there's a real evolution too in the sort of immaturity of his performance when he was like doing the 16, 17, 18-year-old Robbie through to Robbie at the end. Like, there was such a arc that he really worked out, and we didn't shoot this in sequence. So he was jumping around. So one day to the next, like he was throwing his voice higher up, because Robbie in those early years has quite a high voice. He just nailed him in a way that was incredible. So we went through. We got him really late. We had such a hard time finding someone who could encompass all of those things: the charisma, the showmanship, being able to do these very intense, dramatic scenes and dance. It was such a ridiculous laundry list of talent that we had to find. And actually, Kate Mulvaney had just worked with him in New York on. He was just in a couple of episodes of a show that I'm forgetting. Amazon, Al Pacino, Hunters. That's it. So Jono's in that for a couple of episodes, and Kate Mulvaney's in that. And she just said, you got to check this British kid out. He's really talented. And he really just blew me away. And so we did a bunch of Zooms, myself and Simon Gleason, one of the other writers. We did hours and hours on Zoom because we were in Australia and he was in London. And we were like, we can't fly this guy out unless we're actually going to give him the role. But we couldn't give him the role until we'd actually been in the room with him. So we did every scene we could think of, different ways, and he was extraordinary. Famously, I asked him to do a little dance. I didn't want to put him on the spot and dance for us over Zoom. That felt a little bit demanding. So I said, just when you're feeling hyped, just send me a video of you dancing to Rock DJ. And he's like, okay, great. And I put my email in the Zoom chat. And then the next day we were chatting, and I said, by the way, if you want to do it tonight, you can, do that Rock DJ dance we were talking about. And he said, oh no, I sent it to you last night. And I was like, no, where did you send it? And he told me the address, and I was like, that's not my address. So somewhere out there in the world is Jono Davies busting loose to Rock DJ, and no one knows why they got it. And then, it's sort of each of these actors, when they came together, even the boys who play Take That, they all sort of just gelled as like best friends in such an extraordinary way. I think it's part of it is doing a musical, and we had this on Showman, is that you have such a long rehearsal time because everyone has to learn the music and learn the choreography, that it's kind of like band camp extended. So everyone gets very supportive, and they show up on days when they're not filming just to sort of sit behind the camera and cheer on each other. And, it's incredible. And, Rochelle Bannon, who plays Nicole, who's also phenomenal, we obviously did the same thing where she was actually in London. She's Australian, but she was working in London and living in London. And again, we had to do a Zoom thing. And again, I was like, I was blown away at how captivating she was. And the real Nicole Appleton, who she is portraying, obviously because we're dealing with such a sensitive topic, Nicole was involved from script stage and approved the script. Then she approved, Nicole approved Rochelle being cast. We would show her dance rehearsals and say, it's all going to be shown through dance, and this is the rehearsal. So she was incredible. She was one that she allowed us to tell that part of their story, which is obviously deeply personal. But she was just amazing in how generous she was with her time. And so anyway, we knew that the demand for dance was not a small thing, and we'd already rehearsed it with the choreographer's assistant, Jenny. And I didn't want to do a body double. Like, I just was like, I want to feel the connection, and I want to be able to do close-ups while she's doing the dance. And so I said to her, how's your dancing? And Rochelle went, oh, yeah, not bad. I did ballet up until 13. And I was like, that's like actors who say, I can ride a horse. Yeah. I was just like, oh, my God. So I said to Ashley, the choreographer, I was like, get in the room with Rochelle and just please tell me she can dance. And if she can't, tell me she can. And just keep training her until she's amazing. And then Ash called up within like 20 minutes and he's like, oh no, she can dance. And she is just phenomenal. Like, that is, all those moves is her. Wow. And she did that take after take. There is like, some of those really complicated dance numbers, they were like 27 takes, and she just hit it hard every time.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
What I'm just curious, when you're pitching this movie to financiers, how do you go about that? I mean, I guess I'm also asking, what films inspired you? What did you see as sort of the comps, the references?
Yeah.
How did you talk about it?
So I didn't talk about my references too much to financiers because it's a bit terrifying when you're like, it's all that jazz, like it's there's darkness and there's dance and it's, you know, heartfelt and it's beautiful. You know, it's cabaret, anything Bob Fosse, massive fan of. The Wrestler was another reference, you know, films where you have just real low points that mean that when you hit the highs, they are just euphoric. You know, they hit you because you've been to those depths. And but the majority of conversations with financiers didn't end well. It's probably the best way to put it. People were very excited, particularly in Europe. They were like, "Oh, the director of Greatest Showman, Robbie Williams, how much do you need?" And I'd say just one thing: Rob's going to be performed by a monkey. And they would chuckle, and then they would say, "Yes, but you know, in a dream sequence, or you know, he catches himself in the mirror." And I was like, "No, for the whole film." And nobody ever mentions it. And they literally would say, "This is the end of the meeting." And how long I took to tell you that story is literally how short some of the meetings were, which was super awkward when it was a breakfast meeting and you'd already ordered the eggs. And they then tell you the meeting is over. So you sort of go via the waiter and go, "Don't worry about the eggs."
I guess my last question is, what was it like to show Robbie this movie?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I had a real hard time. I made a rule that I would never show him anything without the monkey. And whilst he was on set for a lot of the... So he came down to Australia and he held a whole bunch of concerts, which is how we shot all the Take That stuff with real audiences. He also was there for the My Way. We shot the My Way number first, and Rob was in Melbourne for that because he was spending time with Jono. And so the final number, Rob was there for that. And the floor of Royal Albert Hall and the stage with the orchestra and the big RW was all on a sound stage. So we shot the whole number and we edited the whole number. And then from that, we'd worked out all of our camera positions that we then had to go and shoot plates at the real Royal Albert Hall with an audience all wearing black tie and singing to the song My Way and having the correct eye line that matched our plates back in Australia. So it was quite complicated, and we had to do 2 nights at Royal Albert Hall. And the first night was a Sunday night, and so the British audience had been drinking from midday, and good luck trying to direct them. It was a mess, that no one was looking where they were meant to look. They were waving their arms at the camera. You know, it was like a zombie apocalypse. The Monday night, because they had to go to work and they had a shorter period of time to get drunk, was much better. And we basically got all of our plates on the second night. But Rob did actually have to go out and sing My Way twice for us to be able to get it. Wow. And so we sort of, Rob had seen a lot of what we shot, but he hadn't watched anything cut together. And I waited until 2 years ago at Cannes Film Festival, because of Regent Street, it delayed the delivery of the film by 5 months. And again, on an independent film, you then have to deal with the bank and the bonds, and it's not fun. It's not a fun part of filmmaking. And I'm not saying Bond people aren't fun. I'm sure there are fun Bond people out there, but they just like you to stay on schedule. And so we had to sort of reassure the international distributors and the investors that we actually had a film. And so at Cannes Film Festival, we just had all the international distributors there and the investors, and we played 20 minutes of the film, and it was the first time Rob had seen 20 minutes of the film with the monkey. And he was very engaged, and he was very emotional watching it. But being a pop star, he doesn't quite understand the filmmaking process, and nor should he. But for the next 2 weeks, he had multiple ideas a day that he would text me. You know the scene on the boat with Nicole? Maybe we could do this. And I'm like, maybe not. And he's like, I've had another idea. And he would just pitch some other idea. And he goes, it's a story I've never told you, but we could actually, and I'm like, no, just before you type anything, just say, no, I'm going to write no. Like, I just had to say no to everything. And in my head, I was like, I can't show him the film until it's finished. And I need to say to him, this is the final film, Rob. There is no changes. And if the film is successful, you can put all these ideas into Better Man 2. That is literally what I said to him. And then he watched the film, and the very first time he watched it, and he told me afterwards that he was kind of just in shock the first time he watched it. And it wasn't until the third time that he watched it that he could actually kind of engage with it. And I can understand that, because credit to Rob, a lot of musical biopics get watered down, and you sit there as an audience and you're like, well, I know that's not really true, and I know the places they went to were a lot darker than this. And with Rob, he was willing to go to those places and allow me to show those places on a big screen. And whilst he had read the script and had signed off on the script, it's one thing to read a script. It's another thing to sit there and watch it play out on a cinema screen. And so, credit to him. He didn't change one shot of the film. He didn't ask for one thing to be edited or taken out. So, I'm very, very grateful.
And he shouldn't, because it's fantastic. Bravo. Beautiful work. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks so much for coming.